Good morning, everyone. I have to start today's program by saying, how about those Niners? I'm Jeff Fredericks, Regional Manager of Brokerage Operations for Avis & Young, Northern California, and it's my pleasure to act as your Master of Ceremonies today for Insights 2024, Navigating Change, Unleashing Value. Value is what we hope to deliver for you this morning. Value in the form of insights to the commercial real estate market, the latest in the ever-changing landscape of return to office for technology users, including the emerging AI component, and finally, unleashing value for your investment strategies in light of economic trends and our political landscape. It shapes up to be a fast-moving, informative hour, so let's get right to it. Today's program will finish in about an hour. That'll leave us a few minutes for Q&A, and I invite you to send us your questions using the Q&A button, which most of you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. Questions for our keynote speaker, Greg Valliere, or for any of our speakers today. All of the Q&A will be held until the end of the program so that we can finish on time. So here's what the next hour will look like. First up will be our NorCal Commercial Real Estate Insights and Opinions, led by Dina Gavea, Avis & Young's Western Regional Lead for Market Intelligence. Dina will provide a brief update of the NorCal commercial real estate landscape, and she'll share valuable highlights from Avis & Young's Broker Sentiment Survey. And then Dina will turn the program over to Mark and Brian for Places of Purpose, Tech Workplace Frontiers, a lively conversation between Avis & Young Principal Mark McGranahan and Brian Stromquist, Strategy Director for Gensler. Following Mark and Brian, I'll be back to introduce our keynote speaker, Greg Valliere, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist for AGF Investments, for his keynote talk, An Election Like No Other, the 2024 Biden-Trump Brawl. In addition to handicapping the 2024 elections and sharing all the juicy dirt coming from our nation's capital, Greg will give us a rare insider look at what the Federal Reserve and Congress have hidden up their sleeves. We'll hear about timing for possible rate cuts, the expanding U.S. budget deficit, regulatory changes, the outlook for the economy, and current geopolitical events impacting your investment strategies. Quickly, before Dina gets started, I'm going to turn the stage over to Nick Slonik, Principal and Regional Managing Director for Avis & Young, Northern California. Nick would like to welcome you personally and share some exciting news about Avis & Young before he turns it over to Dina. It's all yours, Nick.
Thank you, Jeff. As Jeff said, hello and thank you for attending AY's 5th Annual Insight event. I'm Nick Slonik, Principal and Managing Director of Avis & Young, Northern California. We have some exciting news to share with you today. As of January 1st, Ross Robinson has been appointed Market Leader for the San Francisco office. Most of you already know Ross. For those of you who don't, he's a Bay Area native, raised in Sacramento, currently lives in San Francisco. He has over 20 years of experience in San Francisco, 15 of which with Cushman & Wakefield, and the last 3 with Avis & Young. We are all super excited for Ross in the San Francisco office. He has already made an impact. As for me, I'll be focusing on my brokerage business and assisting leadership with the growth of the Northern California brand. It has been a great 12-year run, and I very much look forward to the next chapter for Ross and the NorCal team. Well, that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Ross.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for those kind words. And for those of you I don't know, I hope we get to know you soon out there. And I just want to say we're really excited to host this event. Thank you to all of our panelists. And I really hope one day we get to do this in person again so we can put names to faces and see each other. Jeff, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate that. Look forward to working with you, Ross, and you're doing a great job already. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dina for Dina's session.
Thanks, guys. Hello, everyone. As we navigate through the last several years of change, we're seeing some green shoots return in the market, which is very positive. In our first slide, we're looking at the office fundamentals pre-COVID Q4 2019 versus post-COVID Q4 2023. At the top, we see rental growth in a 5-year period and the difference in vacancy levels below. Despite the influx of vacant space hitting the market, we've also seen a bifurcation of Class A view space and trophy assets, which have seen healthy demand compared to commodity space or Class B space. Over the 5-year period, direct asking rents show a slight increase, primarily due to flight to quality, which is a historical response to downturns as well as a green shoot. The stark increase in vacancy, especially in San Francisco, was an overcommitting of space by tech tenants. In Oakland, East Bay, and Sacramento, we saw minimal movement due to a different tenant base of professional service and fire tenants. Industrials, we know, fared better than office due to a continued expansion of e-commerce, logistics, industrial supply chain demand. However, the peninsula has seen a recent surge of oversupply from life science boom leading up to and following the pandemic. However, there continues to be limited supply as direct asking rents saw the largest jumps in the industrial hub of Oakland East Bay and in parts of Silicon Valley where supply was already incredibly constrained. So what does the new work environment look like, and how will this impact occupancy moving forward? We recently took a poll of our brokers in the Northern California region, which resulted in some really interesting findings and opinions. We developed a report called the Northern California Avis & Young Brokers Sentiment Survey. You'll receive a link to this report in the Insights follow-up email. Avis & Young brokers believe that more than half of all companies that have not mandated RTO will require employees in the office at least 3 days a week, and this trend is expected to continue into 2024. Where do major Northern California employers stand? We're still seeing a larger percentage of companies requiring at least 3 days a week in the office, hybrid schedules, yet even a smaller percentage of employers closer to full-time 5 days a week. According to a recent study of Fortune 100 companies' return to office policies, 75% of Fortune 100 companies operate on a hybrid schedule. 45% of them have announced that they've reduced their office space footprint since 2020. 12% have declared they do not require any visits per week, and 21% are requiring 3 office visits per week, which is the most common. And only 5 Fortune of the 100 companies have declared they will not make an official return office date. What impact has this had on San Francisco? Of the leases that have expired over the last 2 years, more than 70% did not renew, adding to the availability, and 60% of that is still vacant. Of the quarter that renewed, half committed fully, and almost a third downsized. There's a strong pent-up demand in the market, and we forecast that vacancy will begin a slight decline in 2024. The recovery may start off slow, but we anticipate an acceleration towards full recovery over the next 10 years. Avis & Young maintains a bullish stance on San Francisco and its unique fundamentals, such as highly educated talent pool and unmatched geography, continue to position it as a market filled with opportunities. So looking into the future, our broker sentiment survey suggests that we're in it for the long game. The initial impact to the market was great due to the shift in how people work. More than half of Avis & Young brokers believe that it'll take at least 5 years for the market to recover. So what is attracting tenants to buildings? According to our survey, it's the golden rule in real estate: location, location, location. Access to transit, amenities, and outdoor areas are still the most important to tenants. However, there's some new emerging trends that they're being considered to bring more vibrancy back into offices. And this is an interesting topic that will be covered more in depth by our next speakers. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce my colleague, Mark McGranahan. Mark's a principal with AY's San Francisco office, an attorney and an accountant. And Mark has over 30 years of real estate practice experience, resulting in more than 8 million square feet of leases in San Francisco, Oakland, and in the Bay Area. Mark has worked as a real estate provider in multi-market transactions for Delta Dental, Wells Fargo, Keenan and Associates, Broadcom, as well as large landlord clients, including Jamestown, Boston Properties, Prologis, Kilroy, Barings, and others. Mark will be joined by Brian Stromquist for a lively conversation around the future of technology clients, particularly here in the Bay Area. As Gensler's firm-wide practice leader for technology workplace design, Brian draws upon his background in architecture, research to develop workplace solutions for technology companies across the globe. His work has been published in Fast Company and Politico, and his recent speaking engagements include NeoCon, ULI, and AIA. Together, Mark and Brian will explore trends around spaces technology firms are leasing and why, and how we can position spaces to make them more desirable, including the emerging AI cohort. Welcome, Mark and Brian.
Thank you, Dina.
Yes, thank you, Dina. What a great introduction. I was waiting for the applause in the back. I guess we didn't get that, so we'll have to bake that in for next year. Thank you. So we had a couple thought ideas that we've been working on, and I'll try to throw them out to Brian, and we'll try to riff back and forth on this. So the first thing that I wanted to try to address is 4 years ago, before COVID, we had all these tech companies in San Francisco, and it was just this mad dash for space. And everybody's trying to cram as many humans as possible. And everybody got this desk and they put their earphones on. Here we are 4 years later, COVID's over. People are not really returning to the office in great numbers, at least not in San Francisco. What are you seeing people doing when they do come back to the office, or what are you designing? Obviously, you have a lot of insights with companies, especially big tech companies like Facebook. So maybe as a primer, just start with what are you seeing in today's market?
Great question. Still seeing a lot of navigation of what hybrid work means for tech and really all of these industries. Right, even 4 years in, there's not a sort of consistent approach to this. Some companies are still figuring out what their policies are. Others are figuring out how to implement them. Others are figuring out how to enforce them. And I think that's what's causing this kind of confusion, or that disconnect between 2019 and 2024. And that means that a lot of them are figuring out their space needs and density needs as well.
So
right?
you think it's still squishy though? I mean, I feel like by this time people go like, this is what I need, I'm gonna go do it. But yet the sentiment as a broker, when I talk to people, I'm not quite sure. So do you feel like we're getting on more solid ground, or is it still a little unsettling and people are trying to figure it out?
I think it's still settling in. And it's really a sort of companies on a case-by-case basis looking still at the reasons why people want to come in. And we know from our workplace survey results that there's a preference for hybrid work across all industries, and sort of tech first and foremost. And it's really to come in to focus on your work, whether it's sort of collaborative work or focused work. And then it's then about finding the right ecosystem that supports all of those modes.
Terrific. Well, I thought maybe we'd spend just a little bit of time. You can see in the background, we're in Gensler's space, so hopefully you can see through the window. And we were
Real employees, not models.
Yeah, exactly. We were fortunate enough to help your company move from a traditional high rise on 3 floors of space, and then you transition to an older building where everybody's on 1 floor of space, and you took 10,000 less square feet, but you have roughly the same employees. Maybe we could use that as a backdrop to talk about what these new trends are. I know you have a couple slides that might be illustrate kind of how you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that's a good, I've heard great things from other people who've walked your space, like that's what we need to be doing more like that. And so this would be maybe a good way to show the people how you did it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gensler, especially this office, like a lot of the tech clients we work with, are looking at ways of inspiring people to come into the office versus sort of coercion. And I think, you know, in the work that we've done in the last 4 years and the work that we've done on ourselves, it happens in 2 ways. One is about creating a buzz that gets people excited. Like, what's that experience that you walk into?
Not a burrito buzz, like a burrito's not enough anymore, right?
No, I mean, you need kind of this hospitality driven, slightly noisier, slightly energetic thing that aligns with your expectation of coming into the office, right? A lot of Gensler and a lot of our clients have had, you know, pretty strong messaging efforts about like why the office is important and why we should be together. And you want an alignment between your arrival experience and the sort of expectation built through that messaging. So that was important to us here. And the other is an abundance of space, an abundance of working points, right? As you come in, knowing that even if you show up at 11 a.m., there's a space for you or a work point for you that's aligned with how you want to work. So we have a lot more variety in here. So even though it's a little bit less space, there's more variety and places to work.
Okay, well, I think you have a floor plan and some photos. Maybe if we just run through that, that might illustrate how's it working for you and why this is successful.
Yeah, so just taking a look, this is our reception experience.
It looks like the proper hotel, by the way. It doesn't look like a reception.
And again, that's like consistent with Gensler workplace survey results, right? And looking at the vibe of what people want across all industries in their office. The sort of consistent generational story was something that felt like a boutique hotel, right? From like Gen Z to boomers. This was sort of where everyone had this great alignment. Something you walk in, it feels comfortable, it supports work, and it has that energy that inspires you as you walk in. So if we look at the plan, you sort of enter into the space, right? We're in this sort of gorgeous historic building.
San Francisco, we could hear it outside.
You know, the sirens outside. Yeah, we're very much connected to the city here. And, you know, and that's kind of part of your entry experience as well. We're here in the Mills building, old Exchange building. You walk into that orange zone, which is really that hospitality driven space, plenty of co-working areas. And then it's sort of divided into these different work zones. So you have the hall there in the middle in purple, and that has a mix of workstations. It has a mix of open collaboration areas. And then finally, as you move to the back, we have the lodge, and that's where you really have these deep focus spaces.
Gotcha.
And it's kind of amazing, even in our office of 250 people, everyone can find a space that's sort of best aligned with how they want to work here. And for me, this is hot off the press. This is me working in every single zone.
Look
This
at
is
that.
just, yes. From up front to way back, I'm sort of the model of how you can use this space in the most versatile way possible.
So this is like going to a buffet. You know you're hungry, but you're not quite sure what to eat. So you can have different choices depending upon, you know, what you're trying to collaborate with somebody or what your mood is, or I got to read something, don't bother me at zone versus, hey, I want to hang out and see if I can bump into some people and think about new ideas.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. So this is just sort of what some of these spaces look like. This is way back there in the vault. You know, and you have these like almost library carols where you can pop in, do super deep focus work. The finishes kind of all support that as well. Dark finishes, acoustic absorptive finishes. Here's one of those sort of more co-working areas. This is right there in the corner. This is
dog too.
We have the dog. Oh yeah, we have we have Gensler's first ever dog policy. Yeah, so long as your dog is under 50 pounds.
We've learned that lesson.
Welcomed here, yes. And then this is that hall space in the middle that was shown in purple. And this has been perhaps the most interesting use case here in that people didn't quite know what to do with it in the beginning. And it's since become this place for exploration, right? As we figure out what hybrid work means for us and for our tech tenants, kind of using this open collaboration space to explore some new technologies and explore some new ways of working. So now these are really vibrant sunlit space. We have that great skylight there in the middle. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
People love it.
Yeah, I love this space. Every time you walk down the middle, you see everything on those large boards and you see people, you know, moving around them and pointing and talking. And it's just a really energetic space, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm. And tech plays a lot into that as well. I mean, this is sort of is kind of like the demonstration of the promise of tech for hybrid meetings. For each of these, there's a specific catchment area for the ceiling mounted microphones. So you can have multiple meetings going on here and sort of have the privacy of sort of these individual settings.
Well, maybe that's a good segue to the next question I had, because everybody feels like hybrid is here to stay, your surveys and everybody else's survey. I make the argument, we already work in hybrid. If you went in San Francisco after 12 o'clock on a Friday, there was nobody there anyways. So now that we've accepted that, there's this challenge of like today, right? We're in the office here, we have people on screen. Is technology catching up, or is there things that you see on the horizon that might be interesting? Because I do feel, at least selfishly in the meetings I'm at, when I'm not in the room, I don't really feel like I'm part of the conversation, which is a challenge, which hopefully will drive more people back to the office, which is good for us. But knowing that, where do you see, or what have you seen recently that's trying to bring those two worlds together more seamlessly?
I think we're at a great arrival point, right? After like 4 years of hand-wringing of like, how are we going to manage hybrid meetings? We've found a way to align technology, sort of cameras and microphones and furniture in a way that supports the different meeting modes that we've known all along, right? For 10, 20 years, we know there's, kind of casual collaboration, formal presentation, something in the middle. And it was making sure that the technology in these sort of enclosed meeting rooms and these open collaboration areas align with those work modes or those meeting modes, and sort of making sure that works seamlessly. So if you can walk into a room like this and be like, oh, we're going to be presenting in a hybrid meeting, the cameras know, the mics know sort of how to set that up.
Got it.
And I think that requires practice, which is the thing that people don't realize. With a lot of our clients, they expect to sort of walk into their hybrid offices of the future,
right,
and like intuitively understand how to use everything. Where like
it takes training, right?
It takes training, right? Like
people like me just can't walk in and press one button. You have to really know which buttons to press and have it come together.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? It's true for all sorts of other industries and aspects of our world. Like it's almost like sports, right? You have to train to have like something that's really performing for you. And it doesn't take a lot of training, but it does take a little front end effort to sort of make this work. And then once it's working, you have these really fantastic experiences.
And I noticed you spent a lot of time at Neocon and spoke there. I felt like the furniture industry was a step behind. Have they caught up? Because I have gone to Steelcase's office recently in LA, and a lot of the furniture is now, it's not the traditional conference table, right? Now the furniture is designed in almost an arc shape to the TV. So those hybrid meetings make more sense, right? You're speaking where people can see each other as opposed to, seeing the back of my head is not very exciting.
Yeah, totally. And that again aligns with how this hybrid tech is operating, right? If you have a camera that's sort of panning around a room such that someone participating remotely can get a sense of what's going on in there, a table set up like that works a lot better than your sort of like traditional conference table where people get obstructed and eclipsed. So it's a really cool furniture alignment with that tech as well.
Okay, well, let's pivot because we only have a couple more minutes to the landlord side of the business, right? So in a lot of the buildings around San Francisco, and I'm sure this is same across the California, across the country, there seems to be this arms race for how do I amenitize my building, right? So everybody's got a bike room. Very few people really ride their bikes up, but it feels good to have a bike room. Like, where's the market going for really more interesting or more valuable types of amenities that if there's landlords there that might have this aha moment besides a bike room and a shower? What else could one think about? And then we got a couple potential slides too.
Yeah, and we can flip through some of these as well. I have a couple examples here, and we'll get into these in a second. But it really is about convenience amenities, right? If you're coming into the office and commuting into the office again, it's amenities that make up basically, crassly put, for the time spent commuting, right? All those things like the mundane stuff, like going to the pharmacy and like picking up kids or bringing your dog in, that have kind of risen to the top. And this was kind of aligned with what Dina showed in her slides, that it's not kind of these sexy amenities, it's these more practical ones. You don't need a gym, but you do need things that sort of speak more to convenience
Right, and
and outdoor space, which I
Yeah.
think Dina had in there as well.
exactly. So maybe let's flip through a couple of the slides. Maybe that will give some people some ideas. I do sense the buzzword today is hospitality, right?
Uh-huh.
Don't make it feel like an office, make it feel like an extension of your home, or you're going to a place that, you know, has this openness and inviting, as opposed to give me a 20-foot marble wall with a fancy picture on it and I walk by a guard who maybe waves to you.
Yeah. And I think this Uber project in Chicago, this is for Uber Freight, is a good example of that. This was sort of both a Gensler building repositioning project of the old post office there, and a complete build out for Uber sort of within a huge floor. I think it's like 3 football fields long.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big floor. And from an amenity perspective, it's about those hospitality-driven amenities first and foremost. It's about celebrating the architectural character of the building, which is true for what we're doing here as well, right? Where even the old like mail chutes become the center spine of the interconnecting stair.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so you're kind of connected to the history of the building in a way that feels more purpose-driven than something, you know, feels disconnected from the sort of building or city in which it's located. Again, there's much like this office, an abundance of space. You always have a work point. I guess when you have a floor plate that huge, it's kind of easy. And to Dina's point, it's the outdoor space that is the really valued amenity here, or one of the 2 really valued.
And I love the basketball court.
Mhm.
Everybody's got the proverbial outdoor space, which is a bench, but having something more seems to be, you know, where people need to press forward in a more stronger, more meaningful fashion.
And then, yeah, this is a blend of workspace. You can collaborate out here. You can play basketball, but you're not like sweating next to someone in a spinning studio. So this is kind of the amenity that people enjoy these days.
Yeah.
The other unexpected one, there's a Walgreens on the ground floor. So this is one of those kind of mundane convenience amenities. And this place is bumping always. You walk into this building, and I've been in there a few times now. The ground floor lobby is activated because you have this, because of a Walgreens there. It's become almost like a social hub in the building. And that's sort of, yeah, similar story. Sort of, we redid one of the buildings in the Coke headquarters in Atlanta based on similar research to what we had sort of done for ourselves. And it gamed out in these similar sort of outdoor spaces. So they were really focused on these mid-door.
Interconnected, they took out some of the actual space so you could see down, creating atriums.
Yeah.
And make it more inviting so people can mix around with each other.
Yeah, this is sort of the fresh take on room with a view.
This is a cool one. This is maybe a good place for us to end.
Yeah, and they were able to sort of strip out part of the sort of building envelope to create this mid-door space, which has become the most utilized space in the building.
Yeah, that's
the
awesome.
photography doesn't tell the story, but you're out there, great Atlanta weather, looking out on the skyline, and people love doing productive work out here.
Sure. Well, thank you, Brian. This was really informative. Jeff, I know we want to stay on schedule. It's almost 9:30. So if there's any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'd love to talk to you. And if we don't have enough time at the end of this, we're certainly happy to reach out if you leave your contact information. So thanks again for letting us be part of this great presentation.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mark. That's a great job, guys. Love your space, Brian. As Mark noted, if you have questions for Brian or Mark, as well as for our next speaker, Greg Valliere, please post them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Okay, now for today's keynote speaker. With over 30 years of experience covering Washington for institutional investors, Greg Valliere provides an unmatched perspective on economic policy and politics and the impact they have on markets and family finances. Greg is frequently quoted in the nation's financial press and is a regular contributor for CNBC, Bloomberg TV and radio, Fox TV, CNN, and CBS Radio. Hearing Greg speak is an annual tradition for many of you, I know. And for those of you who haven't heard Greg before, you're in for a real treat. Welcome, Greg Valliere.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I trust you can hear me. And really always a treat being at your conference over the years. I enjoyed meeting a lot of the attendees, and I would concur. Maybe in the next year or two, we can all be back in person again. I think that would be wonderful. Well, I would just start by asking a favor, and that favor is don't shoot the messenger. Don't blame me for what I'm about to say, but I would begin by saying if the election were held tonight, Donald Trump would win. Trump is the front runner. I'll explain why in the next few minutes. And it's an astonishing story. I would start, I guess, by saying people keep coming up to me over the last few weeks saying it's really no, it's not Trump versus Biden. You're kidding, right? You're making this up. You're just pulling my leg. And I say, no, it's going to be Trump versus Biden. The New York Times had a big article a few weeks ago saying that a lot of Americans refuse to believe that that was going to happen, but I do think it will. There's an outside chance that Nikki Haley could do well in South Carolina, but I don't see it in her numbers. She has to do extremely well on Super Tuesday, March 5th, to have any chance at all. And I think that chance for her is slim. She's run a great campaign. She's gotten under Trump's skin. Maybe you could say she softened him up for the general election. And I think that's one of many reasons why he's so angry with Nikki Haley, feeling that she could hurt the ticket. But I guess the only other possibility of not having a Trump-Biden race is that if one of the two dropped out. I don't see it. There's a rumor, an internet rumor, maybe not as crazy as the Taylor Swift to Kelsey rumors that have been sweeping through the country on the Super Bowl. But the rumor is that Biden is going to drop out at some point later in the year and hand his delegates over to somebody else, Michelle Obama or something like that. I don't know where these rumors get started. I don't believe them. I think that it's going to be Trump versus Biden. So let's talk a bit about the general election, what we could look for. There was a poll this morning on Bloomberg. I was on with them. I was on the air, and the poll came out of the 7 tightest states in America, 7 states that are razor thin margins that could go either way. And what the poll showed this morning is that Trump leads in all 7 of those states, an astonishing result. States like Georgia, Wisconsin, places where the vote is very tight. So that's one big headwind for Joe Biden. I'd say another big headwind, I won't belabor this because we hear about it all the time, is Biden's age. As you know, he's 81. If he were to win a second term, he would be leaving the White House at the age of 86. That's awfully old. I have known Biden, or at least encountered him many times over the years. And I used to take the train from Washington up to New York, and he would take the train from Washington to Wilmington, Delaware, where he lived. And he'd go through the cars and he would glad hand people, slap them on the back, tell jokes, a very gregarious, outgoing fellow. And that's not the Joe Biden I see now. I see someone who looks frail, who sometimes is very hesitant. And I do have to say that age is a factor. A lot of Democrats are unified in thinking that they need a younger nominee. But there, but there are several other issues that I think would contribute to the fact that Biden is now the underdog. It goes without saying that crime is a huge problem in many of our cities, yours and mine. Carjackings are out of control in Washington, D.C. The murder rate, we got up to 225 murders in Washington last year, a crime explosion in the DC area that certainly doesn't help any incumbent politician. And then there's immigration, a story that I think will hurt Biden badly. I would even go as far as to say that if Biden loses, immigration may be the major reason why. He didn't seem to have a plan last year to stop this extraordinary surge of illegal immigrants. We were running at 10,000 illegal immigrants coming in per day right before Christmas. The U.S. will probably wind up with close to 2 million illegal immigrants in the year 2023. So those numbers are astonishing. And it looks to me as if Trump very, very cynically is in no rush at all to get a bill. He's urged his Republican allies in Congress to do nothing so Trump can have an issue to exploit during the general campaign. Another thing that I talked to political strategists, and they all agree that this is something Biden has to worry about, and that is his very weak signs of support among Hispanic voters, among African Americans, and among young people who don't think he's done enough on the environment. And I think that the weakness that we see in those key demographic groups could come back to hurt him. There is one issue, though, and I'm going to go way out on a limb and be a contrarian. There's one issue where I think there's an interesting angle, and that is the economy. For months and months, everybody was down on the economy, thinking it was terrible, and all of a sudden we see a big change. I'd go as far as to say that I think we have a Goldilocks economy right now, not too hot, not too cold. Uh, GDP growth in the second half was a little over 3%, a great number in the fourth quarter. Unemployment is at 3.7%, about as low as it's been in the last 2 or 3 decades. And with all of this good news on the economy, we get some frosting on the cake. And that, of course, is the Federal Reserve, which is getting ready to cut interest rates. I don't think we'll get a rate cut today. We'll see the press conference by Powell in a couple of hours. But I think at the March meeting, there's a close to a 50-50 chance we get a rate cut. And then at the May meeting, I think it's well over 50% that they will have already begun cutting rates. A lot of controversy in the markets as to how many rate cuts are necessary. I'm in the camp that we don't need a lot with an economy this strong. Maybe there's only 3 interest rate cuts this year, but that's rate reductions after a lengthy period of rate hikes. I think that's a very positive story. I was critical of Jerome Powell for the last couple of years. I thought he was sanguine on inflation. Now we see inflation starting to come down. And I think that he has engineered not even a soft landing, he's just engineered a landing without many bumps with this economy. Will it help Biden? Well, that's the big question. And I think some people are convinced that inflation could be resurrected and that inflation is still a real concern. So it's hard to say if it'll help him just a little or a lot. But the main point here is that the economy will not hurt him as it did for the last couple of years. And that's a big, big change fairly recently. When I look at the flaws or the headwinds for Donald Trump, I'd start with age with him as well. He is going to turn 78 this spring. We've seen some instances over the last few weeks where Trump has seemingly been confused, mixing up Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi, getting some basic stuff wrong. Too early to say that this is a trend, and I'm not a doctor, but I see signs that Trump also has to worry about age. I mean, you look at him, and as I always joke, it does not appear that he goes to the gym with any regularity. He doesn't appear to be in great shape, and I think that is a problem. But there's 2 bigger problems for Donald Trump. The first is the number of indictments or cases brought against him. There's 3 or 4 huge cases. I think taking top secret documents to Mar-a-Lago is the most convictable of all of the things that have been alleged. It's a felony. It's pretty hard to get around that one. And I don't know if he will be able to get around that one. There are people who know him who say that he's convinced he's innocent of everything. And if he does get elected, he apparently feels he could pardon himself. I mean, this gets pretty bizarre, but it's not out of the question that he could find a way to pardon himself, or he could serve as president if convicted, which is just, again, mind-boggling and not totally out of the question. The other problem for Trump, I think, is the most damaging one of all, and that is you've got the legendary Trump base, which is powerful, but I'm not sure it's big enough. I'm not sure he could get to 51, 52% of the vote. I think his base maybe could get him to in the 40s, but an awful lot of moderates, a lot of suburbanites, a lot of women showed some interesting attitudes coming out of New Hampshire about a week and a half ago. The exit polls in New Hampshire showed that moderates don't like him. And if he can't win over a sizable group of moderate voters, independent voters, I think it's going to be very hard for him to win the general election. It'll be close. And I worry about violence. I worry about an election result that is not clear for days and days. Hopefully, we'll avoid that. And I think, like many Americans, I hope that if it's close, it's not that close. That we will not have a razor thin result once again. Whoever wins, hopefully, would win clearly, not in a kind of a recount. I should spend a couple of minutes on the House and the Senate. As usual, very interesting narratives here. I think that it's quite likely that the House will flip from Republican control. They only control the House by 2 or 3 seats with a new rookie House Speaker who has had kind of a difficult, rocky beginning. But I think there's a decent chance the House will flip back to the Democrats. The key issue, abortion. We've seen that in many races over the last year or so. There's a widespread feeling among a majority of Americans that the Republicans have been too strident, have been a little bit too radical on abortion. And I do think that would contribute to the House flipping. Ironically, I think the Senate will flip as well from Democrat to Republican. And that's strictly a factor of who's up. As you know, every 2 years we get a third of the Senate up for reelection. And it just so happens that this time there are a lot of very vulnerable Democrats. And I think the House will flip. So you'll see Mitch McConnell back probably as the Senate Majority Leader, working with a very green rookie, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. I probably should spend a couple of minutes. I think we're doing okay on time, Jeff. I probably should spend a little bit of time talking about the other big issue for the markets. And I would even argue the biggest issue of all. And that, of course, is geopolitics. A very explosive story right now, one where I think there's vulnerability also for Biden, but vulnerability for Trump when he says he could solve Ukraine in a day. It's not quite that easy. Let me take the 3 big geopolitical stories quickly. First of all, I think it's unlikely that we can get a truce in Ukraine. There are a lot of people who feel there could be negotiations, but I have felt for quite some time, as Jeff knows, that you're not going to get a deal on Ukraine unless Crimea can be addressed. Crimea is viewed as sacred by Vladimir Putin. It's viewed as sacred by Zelensky. And both, I think, would not agree to any deal that gave up much or any of Crimea. So this could go on for a while. A stalemate in the East could be resolved. I could see Ukraine getting some of their land back, but Crimea is going to be a difficult story. The other big story in Ukraine, of course, is that they're starting to run out of money and starting to run out of arms. This, by the spring, I think will be an acute problem. Congress has been dysfunctional on this story. They've been reluctant to give anything for Ukraine. And I think eventually there will be some aid to the Ukrainians, but it could take another few months. Meanwhile, I would argue that Putin is getting exactly what he was hoping for, and that is a lack of resolve, a lack of resolve on the part of the West. We're starting to see in the U.S. Growing indifference to spending a lot more money on Ukraine. We're starting to see it in Western Europe as well. So I think that Putin has to be quite pleased. And maybe in his darkest nights, he starts to think about what could come next for him. Could it be Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. There's a lot more territory in Central Europe that I know Putin craves. And if this lack of resolve becomes more apparent, I think Putin would start to get a little desirous of getting even more territory. The second big issue, obviously, is what's happened in the Middle East. A horrible story that obviously Hamas instigated, but I think on the part of Israel, there's going to be a reckoning as well. I think especially for Netanyahu, who was asleep, literally, not figuratively. He and the Mossad were asleep on October 7th, and I think they have to answer for that neglect. But the bigger story for me, it could become a widening war in the Middle East that focuses on Iran. The people I talk to in Washington are contemptuous of the Iranians. The Iranians are viewed as very bad and untrustworthy players. The Iranians have a pattern of using surrogates, not their own troops, but using surrogates. And as we've seen with Hezbollah in the north, we've seen with Hamas, of course, and now we see with the Houthis. And I think the Houthis in the Red Sea run a risk of complicating the global supply chain. I think that the supply chain could become clogged, and that could bring back a little inflation scare. I'm not convinced that inflation is totally subdued. Not when I see Super Bowl tickets for $8,000 a ticket, and not when I see the Red Sea looking like it could become a real crisis. So I think the Iranians are going to become part of the conflict soon. We all know that the leaks from the White House over the last couple of days would indicate that Biden has already made a decision to hit the Iranians because of what they did over the weekend, killing 3 U.S. troops, supporting all of these terrorists around the Mideast. I think that Biden is inclined to hit and hit hard. In fact, there were leaks this morning that the Biden administration might continue to hit the Iranians for weeks, not days, but for weeks. This is a big crisis that I think we're on the verge of. And I do worry that perhaps we will be in a situation where this could drag on for quite some time. There are some U.S. hawks who would love to see regime change in Iran. I don't see it. I don't think the Biden administration would be that aggressive as to try to take out the Ayatollahs. But I do think a protracted conflict is likely with perhaps some upside pressure on the price of oil. You certainly cannot rule that out. And then you have China. And on that one, I'm a little bit more sanguine. I'm not wildly bullish, but I do think that any kind of major conflict with the Chinese is not likely. I certainly don't see an invasion of Taiwan. That's very, very unlikely. I know that there's been off the record talks between Xi and Biden about the Chinese not interfering with our election, with the Chinese not overdoing it and giving arms to the Russians in their war with Ukraine. So I think that there'll be we're not going to kiss and make up with the Chinese, but I think that the countries will stay relatively compatible. Now, it's worth noting that here in Washington, there's a deep, deep antipathy toward the Chinese, a feeling that China has not played fair on trade, a feeling that China has not been transparent on COVID, a feeling that China has been hostile in the South China Sea, and on and on and on. There's a long laundry list that makes China very unpopular in this city. But my hunch is that Xi knows when to pull back and probably will not do anything dramatic over the next few months. That's a quick overview of how I see things right now in Washington. But I would conclude by saying the big story of all, I believe, started in the fall of last year when it became clear that the economy was far exceeding expectations. And here we are now on the last day of January, seeing an economy that is so strong that everyone is revising upward their GDP forecast. It won't last forever. Trend growth is only about 2.25%, and we cannot continue to grow at 3% GDP. That's not sustainable. That could actually begin to overheat the economy again. But I would say that moderate growth with declining inflation, with good fundamentals, is going to be the story for the economy, at least for the next several months. So, Jeff, I'm going to stop there and turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Greg. That was just tremendous. And I guess I struck the fear in all of you because we're actually ahead of schedule, which is great. And that means we have a little extra time for Q&A. We do have a few questions in. I'm going to switch over here to gallery view so we can get all of our presenters here on screen for a bit. And Greg, since you were just up, I'm going to start with you and ask this question. With a different Congress and Supreme Court, how much more successful would Trump be in a second presidency at getting his way versus his first presidency? And maybe what does that mean specifically for business issues affecting our commercial real estate industries?
Yeah, it's an issue that people are worried about, quite frankly. America's allies around the world are worried about this, if Trump thought he could totally get his way. He's been quite candid in saying that initially, if he won, he would be a dictator. How's that for being blunt? And he has said that he would, I think, seek revenge. And that's not a traditional trait of an incoming president, to make revenge his first priority, but I think he will. One other thing, Jeff, while I can, I think that one of the big issues that Trump has to deal with, and where he cannot get his own way, is to do something about the staggering U.S. budget deficit, which I really didn't mention earlier. I think that when you look at last year, a good year, the economy was sound, no pandemic in the U.S., no war in the U.S. We ran a deficit of nearly $2 trillion with a pretty good economy. God forbid the economy should weaken. The deficit could exceed $2 trillion. The total U.S. debt is now $33 trillion. And when I talk to people on Capitol Hill, I get the sense that nobody has a plan. Nobody has an idea of what we're going to do to reduce the deficit. Nobody wants to cut Social Security. Nobody wants to cut defense spending. No one wants to hike taxes. And the list goes on and on and on of choices that are unpalatable. So this is an area where Trump is going to have to stand up to the plate. He has seemed in the past to be indifferent to budget deficits, but I don't think he can get away with that again.
Thanks, Greg. Let's move over to Mark and Brian. There were a couple of questions here around how companies are utilizing space, both on a both on a cost basis and on a density basis. But let me just hit you with these two. Seems like companies are using less space. Is that true? What does it mean for vacant office space in the longer term? What is the new expectation of square foot per employee and percent of staff in office on a daily basis? And then similarly, in 2019, densities were at an all-time high. Here we are in 2024. What's different and why?
That's not one question. That's like 10 questions. That's not fair.
I thought we got to talk about the Supreme Court. I have thoughts on John Roberts.
What do you think?
I think that the perception of density is shifting, that it's not kind of the normative metric anymore of, head count per square foot, but it's really something that feels a little bit more experiential. Like, does it feel dense? And a lot of our tech clients have been thinking about this for a while, right? Looking at density as an experience. If you're in the office, do you feel crowded out, or do you feel like you have room to work in different ways? And I think that goes back to the variety of work points, right? So desks, we know, how desks contribute to density within an office. But if you have these alternate work points, like, drop-in lounges or temporary, seats where you can like fire off a few emails, it actually contributes to the office feeling a little less dense, a little roomier. So that's kind of one aspect of density. The other is the architectural character of the spaces themselves, right? Looking at everything from floor plate to ceiling height, sort of how those things contribute to a more experiential conversation about density.
Yeah, I would just add to the conversation, 9 out of 10 people we work with are taking less space. Like Gensler, right? You're in 55,000 feet, you take 45. But they're using space differently. And I think the idea of the 1-to-1 seat ratio is out the door, right? For everybody but lawyers and people like that. So if you're going to, one desk for 2 people, you can have a different feel of the office, which is, I think, where you were headed. So pre-COVID, 1-to-1's kind of gone to 1.5 to 2-to-1. And consequently, density just looks different because people are sitting not necessarily in an office or a desk. They're sitting somewhere else. So I think that's at least my viewpoint.
Yeah, and it really goes back to like addressing a scarcity mindset.
Right.
So long as people come into the office with the peace of mind and there'll be a desk waiting for them, even if there are slightly fewer, if there's that exact right work position for them or work point for them,
Then
they're going to be happy.
Good question.
So maybe sticking with you a little bit, a couple questions around TI costs. One person asked, all these options are great. What if you are in existing space and due to current market conditions, you need to focus on strict expense management? What can we do that's cost effective? And again, how are TI costs affecting technology companies' decision-making, or is it?
Disclosure, we're not contractors.
But we are stewards of the environment. We can talk about the embodied carbon implications of sort of limited TI.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the questions I was asking about furniture. I'm seeing people try to reuse their space without knocking down tons of walls and rebuilding it and focusing on technology and furniture. That seems to be, at least from my experience, the less expensive way to do something versus knock it down, start from scratch. And everybody knows it's $300 a foot to rebuild a space from scratch with TIs, architectural, furniture, technology. So, I mean, what's your observation? You have the same feeling, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's like the promise, or that's like the positive messaging of sort of light touch sublease spaces, is that, the millennial and Gen Z generations of workers are really looking for a strong sustainability story there as well. So if you, in addition to all of your like return to work messaging or return to office messaging, have an embodied carbon story, like we're saving in much the same way we have it in this space, right? We're what are we, zero electricity? No, not zero electricity. We're zero carbon zero.
Yeah, you're buying clean power and being.
Yeah. And that makes for really potent messaging with sort of this increasing workforce who are really sort of values driven.
Well, but the shameless plug is hire somebody like Brian and Gensler. They'll figure out to do more with less.
Yes. Yeah, we're a resourceful crew. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, guys. Dina, shift over to you. Question here for you. Someone asks if 73.7% of tenants did not renew in San Francisco when their leases expired. Did they close up shop or did they move elsewhere? And if they did move, do you know why? Flight to quality, lower rates, et cetera. Mark, you could potentially touch on that, but the question was asked specifically of you, Dina.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I saw this about 25 years ago when I first got into the business and working in Silicon Valley. Tech tenants are mostly in the Bay Area, about 50% of our tenant base. And it's not uncommon for them to take space ahead of needing it. They have been the proponents of taking large blocks of space in the market over the last several years. I think the run up in sublease space that we saw initially was tech tenants putting up for sublease the space that they had never actually occupied. So we call that the definition of shadow space, space that is committed to, that is not occupied, that is there for future expansion of, employees, et cetera. So I believe that San Francisco saw a fair amount of shadow space, and I can say fairly confidently as a research commercial real estate professional that our vacancy level is probably a bit higher than what was always being reported in the market. So yes, vacancy was low, but shadow space has a lot to do with it. So they didn't necessarily close shop, although some did. In 2022, we saw quite a few layoffs, but ultimately it was the ridding of shadow space.
Any comment on that, Mark?
Have to unmute. So yeah, I think you could think about early in the pandemic when those leases were being shed and people weren't renewing, a whole bunch of people just went remote or they left the state, right? Or gone somewhere else. And so I think that was just anecdotally thinking that's 20 to 30%. And then the rest of them, yes, went to a sublease, they downsized, they just did something different. Their space just didn't have utility. And the thought of trying to rebuild a space or chop it in half just become too insurmountable. So it just became easier to do some alternative space. So I think that's my view.
And I'm hoping that AI changes that a bit, right? With their like pretty exuberant growth numbers and the signals that they should be sort of back in cities and finding like central business districts, right? You have Gary Tan of Y Combinator kind of making a big bold pronouncement last week, 2 weeks ago, that be here. And if VCs are in Jackson Square or in South Park or in the Dog Patch, I mean, that's where I think you're going to see a lot of AI flooding back into the city.
Great, thanks. Greg, shifting back to you, these questions are a little bit related on the political side. Who do you think will be Donald Trump's running mate or short list for VP? And then also, what about RFK as a third party or alternate candidate?
Good questions. First, Jeff, I'd say in terms of Trump's VP, it's not going to be Mike Pence. I think that he's probably got a list of about half a dozen people. Here's some names that may not be well known around the country to watch for. A senator from Ohio, important state electorally, named J.D. Vance. I think he's running. He's very hungry. A woman, very strong Trump supporter in the House from upstate New York, Elise Stefanik. I think she would be on the list. Kristi Noem, the governor of South Carolina. I don't think it's going to be Nikki Haley. I just don't think the two of them could get along all that well. It might be Tim Scott. Can't totally rule that out. Trump says he's made up his mind. That I totally disagree. He likes to play that game of hyping a story, but I don't think he's made up his mind. If you force me to make a guess, I might say J.D. Vance, someone you'll be seeing a lot of. One other name is Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, who's moderate, but not that moderate. I think he and Trump could get along. He'd be an intriguing pick. As far as RFK Jr., what can you say? I mean, he's a conspiracy buff. He is an anti-vaxxer. He is eccentric, to say the least. His own family intensely dislikes him, but he could be a factor. I mean, he got in the double digits, in the mid-teens in New Hampshire in polls about 6 months ago. His numbers have slipped, but RFK Jr. could easily, in several states, get 2, 3, 4% of the vote. Look what that did for Ralph Nader in Florida a couple of decades ago. So you could see RFK Jr. be a real spoiler and throw a state or two to the other candidate. Who does he benefit? I would say he benefits Trump slightly because Trump has a lot of conspiracy theorists in his own MAGA world, and I think they would be attracted to RFK.
Great, thanks. Also, stick with you here. How about, we love hearing your handicapping throughout the year, so let's go real early here. What's the early handicap for 2028?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think your governor is too radical for the rest of the country. On issues like taxation, things like that. When I see Newsom, I see a very slick politician, the best hair that I've ever seen in politics. He has a lot of supporters in the party, but again, I think he's too radical for the country as a whole. There'll be a lot of governors, a lot of senators in both parties. I'd take a good look at the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. I've been a huge supporter, fan of Andy Beshear for a long time. He won a second term this fall as governor of Kentucky in a state where you've got Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul. And here's Andy Beshear, a Democrat, winning. A tremendous win by him. Very likable, very bright guy. If there's a sleeper, someone to watch over the next few years, it's him.
Thanks. I'm going to jot those down. Mark and Brian, turning back to you. Here's a question. Building conversions, will they happen this year?
I'm gonna go with no, then I'll let you talk more expansively.
Man, I think building conversions, I would say no as well.
Yeah, just too hard,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's too expensive. It's no government incentives. We're in an election year where everything's kind of a mess locally. I mean, the only way conversions happen is if it's economically feasible. It's just not economically feasible today, I don't think.
No, I would agree with that, all of that.
I'd like it to happen though, but it's just not gonna happen.
Okay, back to you, Greg. You did touch a bit on the deficit. What can when can we expect some sort of agreement on the deficit, or will the House and Senate continue to kick that can down the road?
That's a rich tradition in Washington, Jeff, as you know. Kick the can down the road, don't do anything. So the current budget has a new drop dead date in early March. It was January 19th. Now it's early March. They're not any closer to a deal. And I think, therefore, they'll probably have to extend it again, maybe into May or June. And before you know it, we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30. It's a hell of a way to run a railroad. It's not the way you want to run a government. It makes it difficult to plan. You guys are all in the business of planning a few years out. And at the same time, I see here in Washington, especially, for example, the defense industry, they need to plan. And they can't when you have a 2-month extension, a 3-month extension. And final point I'd make, because of this dysfunction in Congress and because of the enormity of the deficit, I think we'll probably see more credit rating downgrades from Fitch, S&P, groups like that who look at the U.S. and say, we have to lower the U.S. credit rating.
Great, thanks. Not sure, maybe Brian and Mark and Dina, any of you could potentially touch on this. There's a couple questions around AI, and of course, AI is a big focus for us here in the Bay Area. The questions are asked about the impact of AI for jobs in the US in the long term. And then questions started around pricing, which you guys already talked about, but then also AI is receiving a significant percentage of VC funding. What type of build outs are they choosing? So maybe start with you, Mark and Brian, and then if anybody else wants to chime in, just unmute yourself. But talk a little about AI specifically.
I mean, Brian, you might have the best insight just based on what Gensler is doing and working with some folks.
Yeah, and it all scales too. I mean, going back to my previous point, they want to be close to the VCs who are funding them. So it's activating parts of the city, at least here in San Francisco, that have been a little quiet recently. I think the other phenomenon is people across the US, across the globe, moving to San Francisco sight unseen to work for AI companies. So the importance of these companies being located in really rich residential districts, such that because a lot of these employees have no community here, no friends here, so they need these offices and these sort of to create almost like insta community.
Yeah, I was gonna say anecdotally, what I've seen just in some of our listings is the demographic skews extremely young. Like nobody's ever toured a space that feels like they're over 30. Yeah, 35 would be the oldest person. So I agree with you. They have a hunger to be in an office, and whether the office looks different than Google's office, I don't know. I mean, that's maybe you get some different experience, but it still feels like they're talking about cubicles. So one thing I do see is an increased sense of heightened security. Like they want to make sure nobody can get in, and we had one group that came and said, we need to block out our windows so somebody can't fly a drone and take a picture inside our space. I mean, it's that kind of technology paranoia,
Mhm.
which is hard to do in an urban environment, easier to do in a campus.
Yeah.
You sense that too?
I think you could do it in either location, but yeah, the name of the game is not being conspicuous. So, that's either a campus where on the peninsula where you have total control, or discrete locations in the city, sort of, within other buildings. But like culturally, it feels like a throwback to early startup culture, right? When you had like Facebook in downtown Palo Alto taking a lot of storefronts and sort of cobbling together an informal campus. There's kind of a similar exuberance about rolling up your sleeves, sitting next to colleagues, building something from scratch that requires like physical proximity.
Right. Good
Hey,
question.
guys, could I make a point on AI? I look at Congress and I don't see any likelihood of real tough draconian regulation. Half the members of Congress don't even understand Wi-Fi. So I think it would be unlikely that we see. Chuck Schumer still has one of those flip phones for his telephone.
Those are
Well,
hip again.
there you go. There you go. So my sense is that there's not enough sophistication and knowledge of AI to lead to any kind of regulatory crackdown anytime soon.
Yeah, and I would just add that, so I mean, at least in the Bay Area proper, throughout much of the downturns that we've been through, there's always an emerging tech industry that kind of comes out from, the downturn. And I think AI is definitely one that people don't consider has been around for a long time now. There have been tech companies in the Bay Area that have been working on AI and robotics for years now. I think it's become more of a popular, kind of emerging industry with some of the spin-offs of things that have already been in the works. One of the more positive figures that we found, McKinsey actually did a report on this. So in the Bay Area, the net change in labor demand for AI positions, I think a lot of times with technology and the evolution of technology, there's some concern about the elimination of jobs with this new technology. But the report actually said that there would be a net growth of 250,000 more jobs, in the STEM healthcare professions. It may eliminate some, but the net is actually positive. So I think that's beneficial for the Bay Area and the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. It's a rate of change that's happening so quickly that, the headlines show the story of AI replacing jobs, but it's just really sparking kind of these new jobs that are really springing up in our industry, right? Like social media managers didn't exist 10 years ago. And now corporations have full teams of social media managers. So we're going to see a lot more of, I think, those kinds of jobs. So agree with you, Dina, entirely that this is ultimately a great thing.
Okay, we are out of time here, but we have 1 minute, which is enough for me to ask you guys all, who's going to win the Super Bowl? Just want the team name. Go ahead and chime in, and then I'll wrap up.
Niners.
49ers.
I need Liverpool to win the Premier League. I'm neutral otherwise.
Definitely the Niners.
I figured as much for you, Dina. Okay, let's wrap up. You guys all did a fantastic job. On behalf of Avis & Young, thank you all for attending today. Within a couple of days, you'll all receive a follow-up email with links to a recording of the webinar if you'd like to share it with anyone else, as well as how you can get your hands on additional information from today's presentations, such as AY's Broker Sentiment Survey. So thanks again to all of our speakers today, and thank you all for joining us.